A dream to some.
A nightmare to others!
But I will give you a message. A message of death!
Oh yeah! Come out and play it!
Make no attempt to capture them. They must be exterminated.
Matron, take them away! Stardust speaks to you.
My name is the Big Daddy D, David Mabley, and all my sink plungers seem to have gone missing.
And I am Luke Murphy, and I seem to have run out of mercury.
This time we're heading over to the 1960s, a period of history where the television series was still very popular, and William Hartnell was still a number of years off from needing to regenerate.
But today we are not here to talk about William Hartnell's incarnation of our beloved Timelord. Well, not yet, anyway. This time we want to talk about a Doctor that broke all kinds of Doctor Who rules. First of all, he's human. He invented the Tardis rather than steal it. And perhaps most staggeringly of all, his name actually is Doctor Who. However, all of this pales into comparison with the fact that we have a legend like Peter Cushing in the role.
Most exciting.
It is often believed that the only time that the Doctor has been in a movie would be the 1996 television film starring Paul McGann as the titular Time Lord. However, they would be mistaken. Just over 3 decades before that, Doctor Who and the Daleks came to the silver screen in June 1965. And, as we mentioned just before those rather funky opening credits, there were quite a few differences between the television version of the Doctor and this film version.
To answer some of that ambiguity, the Doctor has been human at least twice. Well, he was half human in the McGann movie, something that has never been addressed since then, so I guess that was ignored. The series of New Adventures, Doctor Who books from Virgin Publishing, also had the Doctor as having human qualities in its canon, and there has been some ambiguity over whether the Doctor actually stole or invented the TARDIS.
But once again, I feel that we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Don't we always?
So, before we talk about these films properly, we have to mention the studio that made them. Amicus.
If you mention British-made horror movies, you immediately think of Hammer Films, and if you look at Hammer's output during the 1950s, 60s and 70s, there's not a lot of people that can argue about that. You could also argue that Hammer is the most successful British film studio ever. They may not have had the critical successes of Ealing or Woodward Films, but from a purely commercial point of view, there are very, very few studios, if any, that can challenge Hammer at consistently making profitable films.
But Hammer did have some competition in the horror film market, mainly from Amicus Productions. The remarkable thing about Amicus is that they had no money and no actual studio. But between the years 1962 and 1978, they managed to produce 28 films in total, all turning in a rather decent profit.
Started by Milton Subotsky and Max J. Rosenberg, Amicus, a studio without walls, made use of the Edie levy. Now, this was a way for British filmmakers to receive a subsidy from the UK government to help with the production of films, as long as a minimum of 85% of the film was shot in the United Kingdom or the Commonwealth, and only 3 non-British individual salaries could be excluded from the costs of the actual film, so ensuring the employment of British actors, technicians and film crew. So from private investment, money from the Edie levy, and as low a budget that was practically possible, Subotsky and Rosenberg hit upon an idea that Hammer hadn't done: portmanteau films.
portmanteau is a subgenre of movies consisting of several different short films, often tied together by a single theme, premise, or brief interlocking event, often a turning point. Taking inspiration from Alien's Dead of Night from 1945, Amicus's first film in the genre was Dr. Terror's House of Horrors in 1965, where a mysterious stranger gave tarot readings to other passengers on the same train journey, all showing them where, when, and why they were about to die.
So Amicus had further successes in this genre over the years with The Torture Garden, The House That Dripped Blood, Asylum, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and From Beyond the Grave. Now, all of these followed the same formula, and in the case of Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, all of the stories used in those films were adaptations of EC Comics stories from the publications of the same name. And as comic book adaptations, they work really, really, really well. Now, very, very quickly, before we go on with Doctor Who, we'll talk a little bit about EC Comics. EC Comics was a comics company in America. They were very, very commercially successful in the 1950s because they were basically churning out horror comics, but also crime comics and other things as well, so westerns, romance, etc., etc. The really, really, really successful ones were the horror comics, like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Now, interestingly enough, these were always kind of like introduced. There was a framing sequence that where the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt would introduce the story. Then there would be the story itself. The end of the story, there would be some sort of twist ending. There would be a moral to it as well, you know. And then the Crypt Keeper would then sort of close the comic. Now, at the time, as I said, these were really, really big sellers. They were outselling anything that National Publications, what is now DC, and Timely, what is now Marvel, although I'm not entirely sure whether or not they were called Timely at the time, were putting out. The issue is that at the height of sort of McCarthyism in the States, a rather misguided gentleman called Dr. Frederick Wortham, who wasn't actually a doctor, wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, and basically in this book he said that the main cause for juvenile delinquency in America was all down to comic books, and EC Comics, and particularly its publisher Bill Gaines, was public enemy number one. The actual sort of hearing by all the senators and what have you actually cleared comic books. They said, oh well, we're not going to do anything. Don't be silly, Mr. Wortham, because he was a Mr. He was not a doctor. But the comics companies got together and said, right, to stop us from being targeted like this again, we're going to have a voluntary code that we're going to follow. And the comics code was formed. However, the knock-on effect of this was that Bill Gaines couldn't publish the same types of stories in Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt and, you know, the crime comics and the horror, you know, the science fiction comics and what have you. So he effectively put him out of business. Great shame. The stories are brilliant, really. For 1950s, the stories are superb. They're really, really well written. They're wonderfully drawn. Go and try and check some of these out. And it's some of these stories that Amicus got hold of and did adaptations of. Some of the very, very first comic book adaptations in films. It's not bad going.
Amicus did not solely concentrate on horror. Its first few films produced under the Amicus banner were made to capitalise on the emerging teen market, and their musicals It's Trad Dad in 1962 and It's Just for Fun in 1963 are about as awful as the titles make them out to be.
Although, there are some unlikely gems in the list of Amicus Productions. The Birthday Party, for example. That's an adaptation of a Harold Pinter play. Actually, a screenplay done by Pinter himself and directed by William Friedkin. Yes, That William Friedkin, of The Exorcist fame, and The French Connection.
By the late 1970s, Amicus was finally closing down, with its last few films being adaptations of Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, such as At the Earth's Core, The Land That Time Forgot, and its follow-up, The People That Time Forgot.
After Amicus closed its non-existent doors, Subotsky relocated to Canada for a time and unsuccessfully tried to carry on the anthology tradition with such films as The Uncanny in 1977 and The Monster Club in 1980. Peter Cushing came along for the ride for the former, but he passed on the latter.
He managed to secure the rights to some of Stephen King's properties in the 1980s and got a credit on the King anthology Cat's Eye in 1985. His final credits, again based on Stephen King films, would be The Lawnmower Man in 1992, Sometimes They Come Back in 1991, and its sequel, Sometimes They Come Back Again, in 1996. He passed away in 1991.
However, we're not going to talk about any of these portmanteau films here today.
Oh no, we're not talking about Doug McClure, are we?
No, mate, I wouldn't do that to you, although one day I will get you back for making me watch all of those Godfrey Ho ninja movies.
Well, I won't mind talking about Doug McClure, just as long as we also get to talk about Dana Gillespie.
No, stop it. Stop it right now. Moving on. Although I'm sure we will look at some of these films from Amicus in a future episode of the show, today we are going to be looking at something else that the small studio produced because, as luck would have it, Amicus was the studio that made the two Doctor Who and the Dalek movies in the 1960s.
Hello there.
Hang on, what happened to John?
New year, new Doctor. Anyway, that was a brief history of Amicus, because meanwhile, over at the BBC, a new television programme was about to begin airing its very first episode. The first episode of what would become the longest running science fiction television programme of all time.
It was the 23rd of November, 1963, 5:15 p.m, just after Grandstand, and families over the country were settling down to their tea. The previous day, the world had been rocked from the shocking news that President John F. Kennedy had been shot and killed. So the new television programme that was about to be transmitted, that promised to take its audience on an adventure in time and space, sounded like just the sort of harmless escapism that was needed at the time. Little did anyone know that this seemingly harmless television programme would still be going to this very day.
The premise of the programme was simple. The main character, known only as the Doctor, along with his granddaughter Susan and two of Susan's school teachers, Ian and Barbara, who are basically kidnapped, travel through time and space in a time machine called the Tardis, which always looks like a police telephone box no matter where they go. The Doctor never did get around to fixing the chameleon circuit. Well, not long term anyway.
Originally planned as family tea time viewing, the programme would have been used to educate the audience by using time travel to explore famous historical events and scientific theories. This would explain why Ian, a science teacher, and Barbara, a history teacher, had been brought along for the ride.
Sidney Newman, the then head of drama at the BBC and the person responsible for initially developing the programme, told his staff that although this was a science fiction programme, there was to be under no circumstances any BEMs or bug-eyed monsters, and his staff stuck to this rule for all of 4 weeks.
The very first Doctor Who serial, which these days is referred to as An Unearthly Child, took the TARDIS crew to the Stone Age, where they found themselves caught between warring Stone Age tribes who demanded to know the secret of fire. It's not a bad first story to help you get into Doctor Who, although you might be surprised that the Doctor's not quite the heroic figure that you would imagine him to be. Not only has he essentially kidnapped 2 people and taken them away with him, but at one point he clearly intends to smash an injured caveman's head in with a rock.
Let go of me.
What are you doing?
Well, I was going to get him to draw our way back to the TARDIS.
For its second story, broadcast over 7 weeks from December 1963 to February 1964, the Tardis crew were flown into the far future and landed on a planet ravaged by nuclear war where the only survivors were the peaceful Thals and another race. The Daleks.
The only interest we have in the Thals is their total extermination.
Ironically enough, it would be the Daleks that actually saved Doctor Who. The BBC were already started to get cold feet over the new programme during that first serial, and were preparing to pull the plug on the entire show. Shooting the prehistoric storyline had been costly, and the audience's reception had been lukewarm at best. The decision was made that the show would be cancelled after its original commissioned run of 13 episodes. But then, something changed.
Terry Nation was commissioned to write the scripts for this futuristic serial, during which he came up with the idea of the Daleks. And I suppose you could say at this point, the rest was history. The adventure would end up not only saving the show from a premature cancellation, but would also ensure that the show stayed on the air for far longer than anyone could have possibly predicted. Newman, at first, hated the idea of the Daleks. It went against everything that he wanted to set up, i.e., no bug-eyed monsters. However, he would later change his tune when he read about the audience reaction. Well, that and the potential for merchandising revenue.
But before that, he would need some convincing to go ahead with the story. In what would be a very progressive move at the time, Verity Lambert, at the age of 28, was the youngest and the only female producer at the BBC. And even though she was thankful to Newman for giving her the job when no one else would have given her a chance, she wasn't afraid to tell him when he was wrong, and she went ahead with the originally planned design for the Daleks. And you know what? It's just as well that she did, because otherwise we might have been deprived of a cultural icon that sent waves of children hiding behind the settee for years to come. Mark Gatiss' superb 2013 film An Adventure in Space and Time is a great insight into the struggle to get the programme approved and on the air, and some of the behind-the-scenes drama that went on.
The show would become a huge success for the BBC, with Daleks themselves proving to be very, very popular villains, so much so that the idea was hatched to take the Time Lord to the big screen. So, at this point, Subotsky and Rosenberg for Amicus stepped in to purchase the rights to 3 films based on Doctor Who serials from Terry Nation and the BBC. For the princely sum of £500, which roughly is around about £10,000 in today's money. The first of these was released in 1965 and was an adaptation of the very first Dalek serial. The movie version had a budget of around about £180,000, about £3.5 million in today's money, which the film made back and more besides. In fact, it was the 20th highest grossing film in Britain that year.
The main plot is essentially the same as the very first Dalek story, except some of the characters have been changed significantly. Instead of William Hartnell as the mysterious Time Lord, we instead have Peter Cushing as Doctor Who, an eccentric human inventor who presumably has a first name, although we never find out what it is.
The Tardis, or rather just Tardis in small letters, is literally something that Doctor Who has built up in his garden. It's not a word made up of time and relative dimensions and space, and the way it is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, it's just the way it's been built. There's no mention of transcendental dimensions.
What does that mean?
What? Transcendental dimensions?
Yeah.
Well, it means it's bigger on the inside than out.
But why is the TARDIS bigger on the inside than out?
Because it's dimensionally transcendental.
Fair enough.
Whilst most grandfathers will probably have a garden or an allotment to tend to in their retirement, this gentleman is building a time machine that just so happens to look like a police box. Unlike the serial, there is no mention as to why the machine has this appearance.
Well, everybody needs a hobby, I suppose. I mean, it could have been worse. He could have been writing erotic literature in his garden shed like a certain Mr. Rocky Flintstone did.
Yeah, moving swiftly on. The Doctor is joined by his 2 granddaughters, Barbara and Susan, played in the film version by Jenny Linden and Roberto Tovi. Now, Tovi is brilliant as the Doctor's young granddaughter, and there is a lot of lovely moments between Susan and the Doctor that really makes you believe that there is, that they are genuinely grandfather and granddaughter going off on an adventure together.
No life? No movement? Yeah. Can you see anyone?
No.
Let's investigate.
Oh, yes, let's.
Tovey was 11 years old at the time the film was produced, so as an incentive, she was told by the film's director, Gordon Fleming, that every time she managed to deliver her lines right on the first take, that he would pay her a shilling, about 5p in modern money. She made so much money that Fleming didn't repeat the same deal in the sequel. The film version of Susan is both younger and probably more capable of dealing with sort of dangerous situations than what her teenage television counterpart was. The TV version of Susan was often prone to hysterical fits and was scared of, well, pretty much everything.
The original TV version of Susan was also one of those annoying female characters that basically couldn't take one step or two without getting into trouble. One of those characters that always managed to sprain their ankle from tripping over their own feet, and thankfully we don't see those type of characters anymore. Perhaps showing that some things never change, Susan even managed to fall over and sprain her ankle for absolutely no reason at all in the 20th anniversary story The Five Doctors, where an older Susan was reunited with the first Doctor.
Barbara is now related to the Doctor, and she doesn't appear to be a teacher in this. But she's certainly no damsel in distress, and she helps the TARDIS crew escape danger on more than one occasion. Ian isn't a teacher either, as far as we can tell, and in this story he's Barbara's clumsy new boyfriend, although it was often hinted in the television series that there might be some sort of romance between Ian and Barbara. It wouldn't be until after they stopped travelling with the Doctor that they actually did become a couple.
This couple in Cambridge, both professors, Ian and Barbara Chesterton. Rumour has it, they've never aged. Not since the 60s. Ironic?
The film version of Ian is played by none other than Roy Castle, who we've seen previously on the show in Carry On Up the Khyber. Castle does get to use his comedy chops in this film as well. Whilst the television version of Ian was very much the hero with all the bravery and the morals, in this film he is the comic relief. If there is something to fall over or to fall into, or a box of soft-scented chocolates to accidentally sit in, then Ian is going to be the one to do it. In fact, it's him leaning on the comically large lever that sends the TARDIS crew off on their adventure to begin with. In a way, this is more sort of Ian's story than it is the Doctor's. He grows as a character and eventually becomes the hero that his television counterpart was. He even goes as far as stopping the Daleks' countdown before their nuclear bomb goes off.
Stop the countdown! The bomb will destroy the planet! Daleks!
So apart from the change to the characters, the plot is the same. The TARDIS travels to the planet Skaro, where they discover that the land is completely dead, ravaged by years of war between the two most dominant races on the planet, both of whom have been altered by the actions of their ancestors. Like in the television version, the Doctor advises his fellow travellers that the TARDIS has run out of mercury and will require more if they are to make the return trip back home. However, just like in the serial, it turns out that this was a blatant lie, and the Doctor was just using this as an excuse to explore the futuristic city where the Daleks live.
From there, just like the TV version, our heroes are captured and held prisoner by the Daleks, but manage to escape when Ian hides inside a Dalek's metal casing. They meet up with the Thals, who all look like Ziggy Stardust in the film version for some reason, and then they all sneak back into the city they literally just escaped from in order to stop the Daleks from setting off another nuclear bomb which would leave them as the only life form on the planet left.
During the original serial, the pacing of the story did slow down quite a bit during sort of rather drawn-out excursions through the caves. In fact, it was so drawn out that it almost made us want to see Antodus plunge into darkness long before it actually happened, as it was telegraphed from very, very early on that he wouldn't be around to see the end credits. The same thing really happens with the film version as well, although we do get the sight of him getting punched so hard by his brother that it causes a cave-in, and although Antodus does make the same sacrifice in order to save Ian, the moment isn't anywhere near as tragic. As it turns out, it wasn't really such a large drop after all.
He's all right.
Oh, what a relief.
Although I suppose that's what happens when you have what is essentially an abridged version of the television serial. Whilst the original television version was a 7-parter that went on for about 3 hours in total and was rather slowly paced, this film version moves along at a rather brisk pace and is only 80 minutes long, which is barely even feature film length.
Another difference in the film version is that the Daleks now have a smoke weapon rather than firing what we'll presume to be a laser in the television show. I say presumed because whatever the Daleks fired from their gunsticks resulted in the colours on the screen becoming inverted for a few seconds. It wouldn't actually become a visible death ray until the Tom Baker story Genesis of the Daleks.
Hello there.
Yes, we'll get to you eventually, Tom. For the cinematic debut, it was originally planned that the film version of the Daleks' weapon would actually be a flamethrower. But it was decided that that would be far too scary for a young audience, and not to mention a huge health and safety risk on set. There is one moment where a Dalek has essentially a welding torch to cut into a room that our heroes are hiding in. But other than that, the evil pepper pots are essentially moving fire extinguishers. Although we would later see the flamethrower-equipped Daleks in the TV serial, The Daleks' Master Plan.
Of course, by far the most noticeable difference between the film and the television versions is that this is the very first time we would see a Doctor Who adventure in stunning Technicolor. The television version wouldn't get onto colour until John Pertwee began his run as the Doctor in 1970. But here, 5 years earlier, Doctor Who is breaking away from the restrictions of being on that tiny black and white telly in your living room. And now you can see them in colour on the big screen.
Now you can see them in colour on the big screen.
Yes, I just said that. Anyway, this isn't the only upgrade that the Daleks have had since the television version. As you can see, they now come in a variety of different colours and flavours. Something that was adopted by Stephen Moffat when he took over as producer with Matt Smith's time on the show.
The Daleks in this film also have specialised roles. Again, something that would carry through into the TV series. The Moffat versions had titles like Drone or Scientist, Supreme. It's not hard to imagine that the movie versions of the Daleks were possibly organised in this way. Some of the Daleks in the film have had their plunger arm replaced with a claw. And again, there's examples of this in the TV show post the release of this film. Of course, the most awesome version of a Dalek has to be the Special Weapons Dalek from Remembrance of the Daleks in 1988. This Dalek had no plunger, but just one massive gun.
Yes, he's clearly compensating for something.
Yes, that's quite enough of that, thank you.
So, it's Doctor Who, but with a bigger budget, more impressive sets, better camera work, improved special effects, and it's in colour. I mean, this must have been absolutely mind-blowing for fans of the television show when it first arrived in cinemas back in 1965.
Critically, however, the film got an absolute mauling. Halliwell's Film Guide describes the film as limply put together, whilst The Guardian described Roy Castle's performance as, to call it hammy would be a disservice to pigs. But despite this, the film did well enough at the box office for Amicus to greenlight the adaptation of the second Dalek serial that started on television in November of 1964, The Dalek Invasion of Earth. This time, with a bigger budget to play with, the evil silver pepper pots were not on their home planet of Skaro, but on the very streets of London itself.
Peter Cushing returned as Doctor Who for the sequel, and Roberta Tovey reprised her role as Susan, something that Cushing had insisted on. But this time a new character was introduced, Doctor Who's niece, Louise. What happened to Ian and Barbara from the previous film is anybody's guess, as they aren't mentioned at all.
Like in the original television serial, the Daleks pursue the Doctor, his companions, and a handful of survivors across the streets of London. The Daleks are planning to tunnel through to the Earth's core, whereupon they will destroy it with a bomb. This will then be replaced with a device enabling the aliens to pilot the planet like a giant spacecraft.
That sounds familiar.
The Daleks might have been able to destroy London, but they couldn't destroy capitalism. The film was part financed by the Quaker Oats Company, then makers of the Sugar Puffs cereal. In return for an exclusive merchandising deal as a result of this, several posters for Sugar Puffs are visible during the movie. An early, at least for a British film, example of product placement.
Shit. I should point out that other sugary-based cereals are available.
Anyway, on to the plot, shall we? The opening of the film sees Police Constable Tom Campbell failing to stop several men doing over a jewellery shop. And so he runs into what appears to be a police box to call for backup. But what he enters is the Tardis, just as the eccentric Doctor Who, together with his niece Louise and granddaughter Susan, as they are about to depart for the future. Really, I mean, it's a wonder that something like this didn't happen more often. I mean, it wouldn't occur again until an unfortunate copy did the same in the 1980 story Logopolis, Tom Baker's last story.
Hello there.
Yes, we'll get to you at some point, Tom. Promise.
So, PC Tom passes out, and when he comes to again, he is informed by Doctor Who that they're on their way to the year 2150 AD. No, seriously, why? Is it a good year? Is something significant going to happen? No, no idea. It's just a random year that we're going to.
Upon arriving in London in the year 2150, they find a desolate landscape of ruined buildings. It transpires that the Daleks, whom Doctor Who and Susan encountered in the previous film, have invaded the Earth and ravaged the planet. Some of the survivors have formed a resistance movement, while those captured have either been taken to provide forced labour at the Dalek mining complex in Bedfordshire, or they've been turned into brainwashed, PVC-clad, motorcycle-helmeted zombie robo-men that look like a Poundland-level Judge Dredd.
After the TARDIS gets buried under a pile of rubble from a collapsing building, Doctor Who and Tom become separated from Louise and Susan when they're captured by a squad of Robo-Men. As they are rounded up with some of the other prisoners that the Robo-Men have found, one of them tries to make a run for it, but the Daleks quickly kill him. In fact, the stuntman actually broke his leg when he fell off the roof, but still managed to complete the shot. Jackie Chan would have been proud of that.
Exterminate!
In the previous film, Ian used his cigarette lighter to stop the doors of the Dalek prison cell from closing, and this time the Doctor uses a comb to release the cell's lock. At first it seems that the Daleks haven't learned anything about their prison cell since the last film, but this turns out to be a test where the Daleks actually want their captives to escape in order to test their suitability for robotization.
Meanwhile, one of the survivors, Wyler, takes Louise and Susan to a resistance base in a London underground station, where they meet other rebels, including David and the wheelchair-bound Dortmund, who is the resistant leader. Dortmund, who wonderfully describes the Daleks as motorised dustbins, suggests disguising some of the rebels as Robo-Men in order to get into the Dalek spaceship. From there, they will use his homemade bombs to destroy it from the inside.
Yeah, indeed. It's a little hard to believe that the Daleks managed to invade the Earth, considering that they come to bits so easily. I mean, one of them blows up by just being pushed down a ramp.
During the battle, Doctor Who and Tom are freed, but whilst the Doctor is able to escape with David, Tom and Louise become trapped on the spaceship. Like Ian in the first film, Tom is very much the hero in this story. He's brave and courageous. Even whilst in this strange world, he still acts like a police officer, fighting for the plight of the downtrodden and oppressed, and making sure that no one is left behind, even at the risk of his own life. Having said that, like Ian, Tom is still the comic relief during the film. In this one particular scene, Tom disguises himself as a Robo-Man and then tries to fit in with the rest of them. I absolutely love this scene. This is one of my favourite scenes in the entire film, and it's a fantastic showcase of how good Bernard Cribbins is at doing physical comedy. After the attack fails, Wyler returns to the base where Dortmund and Susan are waiting and tells him that he saw Doctor Who escape. They decide to go to the outskirts of London and hide there until the rebels can regroup. Then they depart and commandeer a van, but when more Daleks arrive, Dortmund sacrifices himself so that the others can escape. Wyler and Susan are unable to get too far away, however, as the Dalek spaceship is sent after them. They are then forced to abandon the vehicle and make a run for it, just before the van is destroyed with a laser. From comparing this film version to the television version, you can see where that extra sugar puff money was spent. After escaping from the spaceship, Doctor Who and David evade the Daleks and return to the now deserted underground station. They assume that Wyler and Susan have gone to Bedfordshire to investigate the mining operation and decide to follow them. Hiding on the Dalek spaceship, Tom and Louise manage to escape when the craft lands by going through a waste disposal chute. Lovely. Finding themselves in the mining complex, they are attacked by a Roboman, but are saved by one of the prisoners, Conway, who hides the couple in a tool shed. Wyler has injured his leg whilst running away from the exploding van, so when he and Susan come across two women that make clothes for the human slaves in the mines, Susan asks them to provide her and Wyler with shelter overnight, whilst they plan their next move.
Where are you heading?
The Daleks mine in Bedfordshire.
I thought you said Watford.
Well, Grandfather won't stay there, will he, when he finds it full of Daleks? I think he'll go on to the mine. He's bound to be curious.
However, it transpires that the two women have informed the Daleks that they are keeping Wyler and Susan with them, as the Daleks promise them more food as a reward for information leading to their capture. It's a situation that many of us would question if we would do the same thing. I mean, these two women, they're not evil, they're not doing anything bad, they're starving, they haven't got any food, and the way they see it is that Wyler and Susan will go into the mines anyway. In their mind, they've done the right thing, and it does make you question if we found ourselves in a similar situation, would we do the same thing?
As Susan and Wyler are being escorted to the Daleks' mine control centre, Doctor Who and David meet up with a black marketeer called Broccoli, who would probably sell his own mother if he got a decent price for her. Broccoli has no allegiance to either side and will happily work with either humans or Daleks if it means he gets something out of it. However, Broccoli agrees to smuggle the two men into the complex, where by chance he leads them to the tool shed where Tom and Louise are hiding.
The reunited Tardis crew then talk with Conway over the Daleks' plan, and it turns out from looking at blueprints of the mine that there is an old shaft leading to a convergence between the planet's magnetic poles. Realising that an explosion at this point would release enough energy to draw the metallic Daleks into the Earth's core, Doctor Who asks Tom and Conway to attempt to deflect the bomb, whilst Louise and David help the prisoners to get away from the mine. But in what is probably the best and most satisfying scene of the film, Broccoli betrays Doctor Who and leads a group of Daleks to him. But as the Doctor is being led away, Broccoli realises all too late that he has been double-crossed by the Daleks. He tries in vain to escape, but the Daleks open fire on Broccoli, killing him.
I told you he'd be here, didn't I?
As Tom and Conway work in the mine shaft to alter the bomb's trajectory, they come across another worker, Craddock, but realise all too late that he is also a Roboman. Despite how helpful Conway has been to the TARDIS crew up to this point, he is not around to see the end credits, as he and Craddock fall to their deaths during the ensuing fight.
Tom uses timbers boarding up the old shaft entrance to create a deflecting ramp, then rushes back to the surface. Meanwhile, Doctor Who is taken to the mine control room where he is reunited with Susan and Wyler. There he seizes the radio link to the Robomen and orders them to turn against their masters.
As the Robomen fight off the Daleks, Doctor Who escapes with Wyler and Susan while the slave workers flee from the mine. The Daleks quickly defeat the rebellion and release the bomb into the shaft, but the device is deflected and detonates at the pole convergence.
The angry Pepper Potts are then sucked to their doom by this realignment in the Earth's magnetic core, whilst their spaceship, having just taken off, is brought crashing down onto the mine and explodes.
With the Daleks finally defeated and the humans freed from their slavery in order to rebuild their world, the TARDIS crew prepare to return back to the present day. but Tom asked the Doctor that he be taken back a few minutes before the burglary occurred.
Upon arriving back in his own time, Tom knocks out the thieves and then drives them away in their own getaway car, heading for the police station and an anticipated promotion. With a huge beaming smile on his face, Tom waves goodbye to the Doctor and his family as the film comes to an end.
And that brings us to the part where we ask ourselves, what have we watched here? Well, the plot of the movie follows that of the TV serial sort of rather closely. The Tardis team split up to sort of their various little teams, and they make their way to the Dalek mine in Bedfordshire, dodging Daleks and patrols of Robo-Men. But there are a few omissions. I mean, the romantic subplot between Susan and David that took place in the original television version has been omitted from the film for obvious reasons. I mean, in the TV story, they were of similar age. Both Susan and David being in their, I would say, late teens. Whilst in the movie version, David is in his mid-20s and Susan's around about 13. In fact, Susan and David actually hardly share any screen time together in the movie at all.
In fact, the TV version of the Dalek Invasion of Earth was Susan's last appearance in Doctor Who for a number of years. Her love for David leaves her torn between wanting to be with him and with that of looking after her grandfather. The romance with David does seem to come from nowhere, as even in the beginning of the story she's getting into trouble by childishly climbing up a wall and spraining her ankle, yes, again, which prompts the Doctor to tell her that what she needs is a jolly good smacked bottom.
It's awfully swollen.
Well, that settles it then.
Yes,
you need to stay here.
We shall be as quick as we can. And you bathe that ankle. What you need is a jolly good smack bottom. Come on.
If I hear any more language like that from you, young lady, you're in for a jolly good smack bottom.
So to go from this on to kissing a boy and then the two of them talking about getting married is a little odd. Still, despite this oddness, the moment where the Doctor says goodbye to Susan is genuinely an emotional one. William Hartnell was sad to see Carol Ann Ford go. He'd come to love her and treat her as if she was his own granddaughter. So the chances are that a lot of the emotions that the Doctor was showing on screen were for real.
During all the years I've been taking care of you, you in return have been taking care of me.
Grandfather, I belong with you.
Not any longer, Susan. You're still my grandchild, and always will be. But now, you're a woman too. I want you to belong somewhere, to have roots of your own. With David, you'll be able to find those roots, and live normally like any woman should do. Believe me, my dear, your future lies with David, and not with a silly old buffer like me. One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine. Goodbye, Susan. Goodbye, my dear.
The film misses out this dramatic moment entirely, and instead Susan ends up spending most of her time with Wyler, who starts off the film as very gruff, a very stern character, but throughout the film you see his caring and warm side come out as he becomes very, very protective of Susan, like she was his own family, which, you know, is lovely to see. So, yes, you don't get the dramatic moment of Susan leaving, but you actually get this, which is arguably, I would think, much nicer.
There isn't any sneaking around in the sewers and avoiding alligators either, which was present in the original television serial. And, to be honest, that is probably just as well. It seems to be that whenever there's an underground sequence during a Dalek story, it causes the pacing to suffer. Also, it was rather obvious in the TV version that those alligators were in fact baby ones. There's also no scene where Barbara uses events from history to trick the Daleks into believing they're about to be attacked.
This revolt is timed to start almost immediately. As in the case of the Indian Mutiny, which I'm sure...
Indian Mutiny? We are the masters of India.
I was talking about Red Indians, in disguise. The plan will run parallel with the Boston Tea Party. Naturally, you already have information about this.
Wait, why have I not been informed of this? There has been no information.
Good. That means the first part of the plan is a success. Now, I warn you. General Lee and the 5th Cavalry are already forming up to attack from the north side of the crater. The second wave, Hannibal's forces, will of course come in from the southern Alps. The third wave...
Attention! Attention! Mobilize defense forces!
Mainly because A, Barbara isn't in the film, and B, her replacement, Louise, doesn't really do anything at all.
The obligatory monster of the week doesn't make it to the film either. This was the Sliver. Not the most well-known monsters in Doctor Who. This was introduced in episode 5 of the TV serial, a sort of pet for the Black Dalek. It lasted all of 10 minutes in the episode, if that. Wasn't particularly very well realised, served no function in the overall plot of the story, and thankfully was never seen again. Joining the likes of the Mechanoids, the Crotons, the Monoids, to name but a few monsters that have only appeared on screen once.
The loss of the amount of the padding that was in the television serial does make for a film that is very well paced. With an 81-minute running time, it's not that much longer than the first film. So again, it's still not quite feature length. The television version was quite grim in places, and although the film version is more colourful, it still does manage to portray the downfall of humanity in a way that embodies the scale of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, in a way that Doctor Who couldn't really portray up until this point. It has more scope and size than the original and a lot more action, although there is still a good amount of comedy in there as well. For these reasons, many Doctor Who fans may actually prefer the film version of the story rather than its original television version.
Like Ian in the previous film, this is really Tom's story about how he develops as a character and deals with the strange and alien threat that has been forced upon him. And he does get a very satisfying ending when his adventure with the Doctor ends and he returns to his own time, now with the obvious knowledge of what happens at the start of the film. Peter Cushing did actually have a bout of illness during filming, so some of the script was rewritten on the fly, so that Tom ended up doing some more of what possibly the Doctor would have been doing in the original Doctor script.
The film does improve on a few things from the TV serial. Firstly, the look of the Robo-Men in the film is that of shock troopers, you know, all in black helmet with a reflective visor so you can't see their eyes. It's a striking look, as opposed to, well, this in the TV serial, which is not like that at all. But at the end of the day, TV budgets, what can you do?
The look of the Dalek saucer in the movie is probably the main highlight, something that could never be fully realised on the small screen. Here, though, we see a much expanded set for the Dalek saucer, add on the model work for when the saucer is in flight, and it certainly puts the TV version to shame. Again, there's that sugar puff sponsorship coming to good use.
Again, the film was popular with audiences, but not so much with the critics, and unfortunately this time it wasn't a big hit at the box office either. So plans to make a third movie, which was going to be an adaptation of Terror Nation's third Dalek serial, The Chase, never came to fruition. The film has a great cast though, and there are a lot of familiar faces in the film.
Ray Brooks was cast as David, who was advertised in the trailer for the film as the man with the knack, which was a reference to the film The Knack and How to Get It, which he starred the year before in 1965 alongside Michael Crawford. In the same year as this film came out, he also starred in Ken Loach's Kathy Come Home. This was followed with various TV roles, The Avengers, Danger Man, Doom Watch, film appearances, but he will always be best remembered as the narrator of Mr. Ben.
As if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared.
"Can I help you, sir?" he asked.
Andrew Keir was cast as Wyler. He was a familiar face to TV and film audiences in such productions as A Night to Remember and Cleopatra. Although he's probably best remembered for the Hammer productions that he starred in. Pirates of Blood River in 1962, Dracula, Prince of Darkness in 1966, The Viking Queen in 1967, and Blood from the Mummy's Tomb in 1971.
However, his most famous role for Hammer was taking on the part of Professor Bernard Quatermass in Quatermass and the Pit. Again, a big screen version of the BBC serial, which we have mentioned on this very programme quite a few times. I mean, Life Force, Doctor Who Spearhead from Space. I'm sure we might cover that film at some point because, quite frankly, it's brilliant. I don't need any excuse to cover that Quatermass.
Taking on the small role of Broccoli was Philip Murdoch, a Welsh actor who worked extensively across television, film and theatre, from the RSC to that episode of Dad's Army. Yes, that episode.
Right, what you like, you're not going to win this war.
Oh, yes, we are.
Oh, no, you're not.
Oh, yes, we are. Whistle while you work. Hitler is at work. He's half army, so's his army. Whistle while you...
Your name will also go on the list. What is it?
Don't tell him, Pike.
Pike.
Maddock also played Magua in a 1971 BBC production of The Last of the Mohicans. He appeared in 5 episodes of The Avengers during the 1960s. He took the role of DCI Noel Bain in the series A Mind to Kill, which was produced from 1994 to 2002. And that was a series that was filmed in both English and Welsh. So, you know, that's really, really good detective series. Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD is also the start of an incredibly long association with Doctor Who, as he appeared many times across the 1960s and 1970s. He appeared in 2 Second Doctor serials, The Crotons, where he played Elic, a high-ranking member of the Gon Society. Avoid the Crotons like the plague. It's awful. It really, really is. Not a very good story. He was also in the War Games, however, where he played the villainous alien warlord. And in the 1970s, he appeared in 2 Fourth Doctor serials, The Brain of Morbius and The Power of Kroll. The Brain of Morbius is wonderful. It is absolutely brilliant. It is basically Doctor Who does Frankenstein, and Philip Maddock plays the Dr. Frankenstein character. In this case, the villainous and quite mad Dr. Solon, who very, very quickly is trying to implant the brain of a long-dead Time Lord into the body of a monster, and various other bits and pieces happen. Lots of bits from sort of Doctor Who lore actually end up in this, starting this story. One rather infamous bit where the Doctor is locked in a mind duel with Morbius, and you see faces that have come to now mean that it could be the Doctor remembering past lives at the time as child and what have you. Back then I was thought, well, no, that's the Doctor's past selves, those are Morbius's past selves, and somebody's just taken it massively out of context, I think. But hey ho, that's how I would have done it. Somebody else has done it a different way. So, but The Brain of Morbius is really, really good and well worth a watch, and certainly a Tom Baker story that I would like to cover in the near future. It's actually one of the very, very first Doctor Who stories that I got on VHS. The one that bought myself. I got one for Christmas one time, and then I went out with some Christmas money and bought one myself. It was The Brain of Morbius, and it scared the pants out of me.
Which brings us nicely onto the Tardis crew for this movie. Jill Curzon, who takes over from Ian and Barbara, appeared in numerous TV roles in the 60s, with appearances in The Champions, The Saint, and Adam Adamant Lives. She also appeared in a few films, but this was probably the most high-profile performance in her career.
Roberta Tovey, who appeared in both movies as Susan, Doctor Who's granddaughter, appeared in numerous roles in film and TV during the 1960s. For example, Runaway Railway and The Beast in the Cellar. Don't worry, I've I've never heard of them either.
And of course there is Bernard Cribbins, who is a national treasure. He started his professional career at the Arts Theatre on the West End in A Comedy of Errors in 1956. And for the past 50 years he's been a constant on film, television, and even the UK music charts. He had 3 top 40 singles in the 60s. He appeared in 2 Carry On films, Carry On Jack and Carry On Spying. Well, okay, officially he appeared in 3, but if Carry On Columbus is going to be omitted from the official DVD box set, who are we to argue? And he also appeared in the original 1967 version of the James Bond film Casino Royale. Wow, he really does get about a bit, doesn't he? And for more on that particular movie, please see episode 2 of our show, where we took a look at said film.
What's new, pussycat?
No! Cribbins is probably best known to people of our generation for his contributions to the series Jack and Nori, where he appeared in more episodes than any other storyteller. He appeared in 114 between 1966 and 1991. I'm in my early 40s now, and I still want Bernard Cribbins to read me a bedtime story. Cribbins replaces his fellow Carry On star Roy Castle as the heroic yet rather bumbling sidekick role, doing some excellent physical comedy when he tries to fit in with the rest of the Robo Men, but he also has a lot of fun doing the sort of action heroics he was never really asked to perform in any of his other work. And of course, like many, this certainly wouldn't be the last time that Cribbins would cross paths with the Time Lord. Oh, damn these onions.
Right, yes. Bigger on the inside. Do you like it? I thought it'd be cleaner. Cleaner?
And last, but certainly not least, there is Peter Cushing. Well, what hasn't Peter Cushing been in? From Sherlock Holmes to Baron Frankenstein, from Winston Smith to Grand Moff Tarkin, Cushing had a career that spanned 6 decades across television, film, stage and radio. During that time he's killed more vampires than Buffy, outsmarted Moriarty, fought Daleks, travelled to the Earth's core and verbally bitch-slapped Darth Vader whilst blowing up Alderaan. Yep, Chuck Norris has got nothing on this guy.
No matter the role, Peter Cushing never, ever gave a performance that was less than 100%. And in some cases, he wasn't even paid. Spending the first 3 years of his acting career in Rep Theatre, Cushing made his screen debut in The Man in the Iron Mask in 1939. A high point in the early Hollywood part of his career was being cast in A Trump at Oxford alongside Laurel and Hardy in 1940. Now, unfortunately, these early successes didn't lead to more work, and due to the outbreak of World War II, that certainly didn't help. I mean, at one point he was forced to work designing ladies' headscarves at a Macclesfield-based silk manufacturer to make ends meet. In the autumn of 1946, after the war ended, Cushing unsuccessfully auditioned for the part of Paul Varell in a stage production of the play Born Yesterday that was being staged by the famed actor and director Sir Laurence Olivier. Now, he wasn't cast because he insisted he could not perform in an American accent. After Cushing attempted the accent and failed, Olivier replies, "Well, I appreciate you for not wasting my time. I shall remember you." Nearing middle age and finding it increasingly harder to make a living in acting, Cushing actually began to consider himself to be a failure.
In 1947, Laurence Olivier sought him out when he was adapting Hamlet into a film. Cushing's wife Helen pushed him to pursue the role. Far from being deterred by Cushing's unsuccessful audition the year before, Olivier remembered the actor well and was happy to cast him. But the only character left unfilled was the relatively small part of the foppish courtier, Osric. Cushing accepted the role, and Hamlet, in 1948, marked his British film debut. Hamlet went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture and earned Cushing praise for his performance. Also appearing in the film was Christopher Lee, who would eventually become a close friend and frequent co-star with Cushing.
Yeah, and Cushing appeared in 22 films for Hammer, playing Baron Frankenstein 6 times, Dr. Van Helsing 5 times. He played Sherlock Holmes in both film, the Hammer version of The Hound of the Baskervilles, and on television. His performance as Winston Smith in 1984, which was adapted by Nigel Neal in 1954, led to questions being asked about its suitability in Parliament. His final film role came in 1986 with Biggles, An Adventure in Time, which I have a soft spot for. Mabbers, that could be an interesting candidate for us to look at. Cushing died in 1994 after a long fight against prostate cancer.
Peter Cushing was actually offered the role of the second Doctor, but it looked like William Hartnell was going to leave the show, but he actually turned the role down. Something that he would later say he deeply regretted. It's a bit awkward that the films depict such similar events to the ones seen in William Hartnell's adventure, but there's probably a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey explanation for that.
There is indeed, David. In fact, the biggest obstacle to Peter Cushing being Doctor Who is the fact that he's already canon. In Stephen Moffat's novelisation of The Day of the Doctor mentions that he knows Peter Cushing personally, and that Cushing made some rather inaccurate movies about some of his adventures. And the Doctor even mentions that he loaned Peter Cushing a waistcoat for the second film. The novel also mentions that Cushing's friendship with the Doctor explains how he managed to appear in Star Wars Rogue One several years after his death. In fact, allow me to read you some, if I will.
Well, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that you've got the actual sort of novelisation, the proper adaptation of the show. Hang on a minute, what's going on here? Are you about to do a dramatic reading here, Luke?
Hello everyone, and welcome to Storytime with Luke. At the table, negotiations had entered their 9th hour, and both Kates looked ready to flop face down. Clara noticed that the Osgoods were taking a break with each other and appeared to be sharing the same inhaler, which surely presaged well for peace on Earth. The two younger, older, Doctors were wandering about the shelves, fiddling with things and occasionally gossiping about some photographs of their various companions, which they found pinned to a notice board. There had been an ugly period when they discovered a VHS tape of the movie Daleks Invasion of Earth and insisted on watching it. They nearly derailed the negotiations by shouting, cheering and joining in, and then had spent the next hour calling each other Doctor Who and talking like Peter Cushing. Clara had a sinking feeling that her Doctor might stick that way. "I love his bandy legs," he said, imitating Doctor Who's walk by making no apparent change at all. "I can tell," said the other one. "How?" When they'd found a DVD of the other movie, remastered, they tried to get the old man to join in, but he smiled and waved them away.
So, these films are canon, technically, but they're not always brought up in discussions about Doctor Who, and they can get easily forgotten about. They weren't easily available on home video for a good number of years, which certainly didn't help. I had heard of both of these movies, but it's only now we're reviewing them both for this show that I've actually watched them, and I rather enjoyed them both. Doctor Who's got a lot in common with another UK icon that's constantly changing his face, James Bond, who also has a couple of movies that are official but not quite canon as well, with Never Say Never Again and the aforementioned 1967 version of Casino Royale that we've covered here previously.
Okay, so both of the Peter Cushing Doctor Who movies, of which I have the Blu-rays here, they are family-friendly science fiction films to put on during any rainy Sunday afternoon at a brisk 80 minutes each. They are also a lot easier to sit through rather than the 3+ hours you would need to watch through the original black and white television series. I would probably hazard a guess, like many, I actually saw the film versions before actually seeing the TV versions. So for years, these were the original Dalek stories for me. So, and now we have nice shiny Blu-ray sets, which I think have actually been out for a couple of years. So they're not brand new, but they are certainly digitally restored, remastered picture, etc. They look really, really good. I believe that both of these films are also are now available on BritBox, the new streaming service from the BBC and ITV. So perhaps these two films will come up in Doctor Who related discussions more often.
Detective Inspector Tom Campbell, OBE.
Thank you, lads.
Well, hello there. As you can see, it's been a while. It's been about, what, roughly 18 months?
It's roughly around about that, yeah. But we are actually in one another's company again.
Yes, we are. We're back in our natural habitat, i.e. the pub. So we'll make this quick because we have got some serious catching up and some serious drinking to do.
Also, the fact is that you say our natural habitat is the pub. It really does give a false impression about us. Well, no, actually, it really does give a false impression about us. Yes, well, what a year it has been.
It really has. And I do think it's quite fitting that we started off lockdown reviewing Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And we're finishing lockdown, hopefully, touch wood, please, also reviewing Doctor Who.
Yes.
We've done a bit of Doctor Who now, and I think...
Which is all my fault, really.
Yeah. You're a bad influence on me. Or
a Godfrey Poe. That's all.
Fair enough. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because
it's not happening.
Because we've done Doctor Who for quite a while, I think now it's time to change genres a bit. Maybe it's time to return to the chop socket genre.
I'm fine with that.
Maybe it's time to return to the martial arts movie genre.
I am fine with that.
We do have a short list of films that we want to cover on here. A short list that just seems to get longer and longer. Hopefully by the time we next bring an episode of We Need to Talk About ... to you, we'll be back in the bunker.
Yes.
But we'll have
which has been hermetically sealed for the past 18 months.
It has.
Genuinely COVID-free.
Yeah.
So that'll be nice.
It will.
We went in deep clean and what have you, so it'll be fine.
It just smells strongly of lemon now for some reason.
Which is not a bad smell, to be honest with you. You know, it's lemon scented. I mean, it's perfectly fine. I'm fine with this. Yes. So we've just finished doing sort of Daleks Invasion Earth 2158.
We've done the two Peter Cushing Doctor Who movies. For many people, this would have been their first exposure to Doctor Who.
Certainly for those two stories, because I think, as I mentioned, I probably saw the movies before I watched the TV version of it.
So, and this was during the time as well where the BBC, in their infinite wisdom, would not only refuse to repeat episodes of Doctor Who, but they would actually destroy the tapes shortly after broadcasting. Which makes me just want to have a Tardis just so I can go back in time and stop that from happening.
Well, yes. Considering sort of some of the early stories that are missing, presumed, like I don't know, Marco Polo, Evil of the Daleks, various other bits and pieces.
Certain parts of the Highlanders, certain parts of the Underwater Menace, which have started to get the animated treatment.
Yes, quite a few actually. There's an animated version of Evil of the Daleks coming out September time, I think. So, which is looking really nice.
I'm sure at one point we will return back to the world of Doctor Who.
Yes.
As we've mentioned various times, there's a lot of Tom Baker stories that we want to cover.
Absolutely.
But I think we don't like to sort of settle into the comfort zone a little too much. We like to swap genres. So I think a change of genre.
We're going to do something different for a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely on the card. So what that'll be, we will have to wait and see. I'm just so pleased that we've got the chance to be together again, rather than doing this remotely.
Actually, in real life, in the company of friends. It's not Josh on camera. Being cameraman this time, we've sent him down.
We've sent him down to get around the drinks. It's the lovely Sophie that's currently doing the filming for us, which probably explains why the filming is of a better quality than when it was. Oh, hiya, Josh. Sorry, we weren't talking about you already.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Go on. Get down here. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Jeeves. Right, as you can see, we have some drinking to catch up on, so I think it's about the right time to round this episode up.
Yes. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for bearing with us during these interesting COVID-related times.
Please stick with us because there is more to come. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you click on the little bell to be notified when there's a new video.
Stuff happening around here with bits and pieces.
Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and until we meet up again, which hopefully will be in the bunker, I'd just like to say that I am the Big Daddy D, David Mabley.
I am Perfect.
Thank you very much for catching this episode of We Need to Talk About ... and we will catch you again next time, my friends.
You need to remember to turn off the security measures in the bunker.
What, just in case?
Well, the attack lasers and everything.
Oh, I
thought the Ebola virus.
I thought you'd switched that off.
No, I didn't switch it off. You switched it off.
No, you switched it off.
I said to you, make sure you switch it off.
I thought I told you to switch it off.
Oh, shit.
So this is where COVID came from.
Didn't you get Will to be a cleaner?
Well, that was a fucking mistake, wasn't it?
In fact, I've not seen Will for about 18 months.
Someone said that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, it probably was. Hi, Will, if you're still alive, we love you.
Yes, okay, this might...
I think we better go to the bunker and just check if the has any human remains. What are you talking about?
I think this might get awkward.
I think it might get very awkward. In fact, yeah, delete this. This is incriminating evidence.
Cut.
Stop.